G'day, I'm Marco and welcome to Swift Almanac. Last lesson we looked at single view controllers, and this lesson we'll be looking at the table view controller. Table views allow us to display long lists of data in horizontal cells. Each cell will have the same elements such as labels, images, etc. For this lesson we will simply be starting a single view app as a table view without bothering about a launch screen. We will do this firstly in the storyboard, and then in the second half we will remove the storyboard and do the whole thing in code. So here we go. Okay, so in storyboard, okay, so if you want to get the final source code for the project, you can go to source control and clone, and the URL that you need to use is down here. So the first thing we want to do is create a new project, a single view app. Go next, we'll call it table view. We'll save it on the desktop and we'll do our typical cleanup. We don't need view controller because we're using a table view controller. We don't need the launch screen. In our table view target, we want to change this launch screen just to say main so we don't get any errors. And then we want to create a new group, which we'll call table view controllers. And in that, we're going to create a file, CocoaTouch class, which we'll call main table view controller, and it's going to be a subclass of the UITableViewController. We don't need a zip file. That's for pre interface builder days. We don't need it. And then, as I said in the introduction, we've got a table view, and we also need to create a cell or a table cell, another CocoaTouch class. So it's a UITableViewCell, and we'll just call that main table view cell. So we've got our two files. Move this down to here, and then we'll go to the main storyboard. We'll get rid of our default controller because we don't need it. And on the right hand side here, you'll see there's table view controller. We'll drag this out and release, and then it gives us a table view controller which has a table view, and then it has this table view cell which is this prototype cell here. So the first we need to do is go up to the identity inspector, and here it's custom class, and we want to call it a main table view controller. And we want to go down to the table view cell, and we also want to call that main table view cell. For the cell, we also need to fill in this reuse identifier, and we'll just call that main. It needs to be unique, but for now we'll just call it main. And if we I might just save this. I come back to it. Now if we get onto our prototype cell, we'll just put a label in here so we can show what's going on. We just drag the label into the area, and this label is part of the table view cell, so this label is going to occur in every cell that's created as we go down the page. And because we're doing this in Interface Builder or in a storyboard, we need to create an outlet. Now Xcode 9 hasn't been nice to me today, so this may crash, but we'll see what happens. All good so far. So make sure that you don't use the view controller, that you use the view cell and make a bit of space, and we just control drag from the cell over to the top, create an outlet, and we'll call it call sign label. It's a UI label, create that connection, and it's in place. We'll save everything, go back to the main board. Okay, so we've done everything we need to do in the storyboard. Let's look at what is in main table view cell, and essentially there is nothing here that we need to do. We just have this label that we're going to be able to call. All of the exciting stuff. Oops, before I do that, let's go back here. So we need to set this as the initial view controller, and so this view controller here we just need to put is initial view controller, and that gives us our little arrow, so that when the application starts up, it's going to move to this view controller. I'll just save that, and I'll just run it now and make sure it's going pretty well. Okay, so we've got everything happening, and we're all happy with that. So let's look at the table view controller. Now you can see here it's a subclass of the UITableViewController. We'll just have a quick look at that by holding down Command and clicking on it. We'll jump to the definition, and we can see here that it's simply a subclass of a UI view controller, and it's also got these table view delegates and table view data sources. So one of the first things we need to do is we need to set up these delegates. So in our view did load, there's a field called table view dot delegate, which is equal to self, and there's another one called table view dot data source equals self. Now, this is the first time we've come across data sources, and data source is basically working in exactly the same way as a delegate, but a delegate is usually setting some data or creating a function, whereas a data source is accessing some data. So let's create some data call signs, which will make an array of strings, and then we'll just set that equal to alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, Echo, Foxtrot. So we've got an array of strings, and of course it's an array of string, and of course we will we'll need a reuse identifier, so we will set up a constant called reuse identifier. We'll start with a K, and we enter that into the storyboard, and it was called main. And again, you can set that as a string. If you're wondering what the K stands for, it's not K for constant, it's K for key value. So K, this is the key, the reuse identifier, and the value is going to be main. So good programming practice. I'm not quite sure where that came in. About 20 years ago, people started using Ks for constants in their naming convention. So let's look at what we've been given. We don't need to worry about this memory warning. So the number of sections, well, we're going to have one section. So we want to return the number 1, and there's another override function, the number of rows in the section. So the number of rows is simply the number of items that we have in our array. So you'll see this all the time. We just go array.count, and that tells us or tells the table how many times it's going to display the items. And then we need this function here, which is the cell for the row at the index path. And essentially what happens is every time a cell needs to be drawn, it's going to say, I need the 0th cell, i.e. the first element in this array, and then it's going to say, I need the first, it's going to call this again and say, give me the first cell, and then the second cell, and the third cell, and the fourth cell. So each time it needs to redraw one of these cells, it calls this function TableView cell for row at, and as you can see here, it's already got some pseudocode for us. It says let the cell equals the TableView dequeue the reusable cell with identifier reuse identifier. So we want to remove this string and put in our k reuse identifier, and we can have for index path. That says we want to configure the cell, and what we want to do is we want to say cell dot, now what did we call our main cell back here? Call sign label. Dot text, so we want to set the text equal to our call signs data, and the item we want to choose is the index path dot row. So what you need to understand is that we're doing this as a table, and a table is X columns wide and Y columns down. So it's essentially a 2 by 2 array. Now most of the tables you see will only have the one column, but it is possible to have multiple columns and display them. And something that I've done previously, I've had a segmented control across the top, so there's been like 3 or 4 different options, and depending on which option is selected depends on which column we draw. So in any event, just be aware that this index path is rows and columns, and we need the row. Now what I've got here is that the UITableView cell doesn't have a member call sign label, and that's because we need the type or the subclass main TableView cell. So with this let statement, we're going to say guard let cell equals that as, with a question mark, optional, as the main table view cell. So we're going to try and cast the cell that is returned to us as a main table view cell, and if that doesn't happen, we're going to do a fatal error. Now you can't put a return here because if you do, you get another problem because we have to return a cell, and we don't have one because it's nil. So there's this call for fatal error, which gives you a little error message, bad cell could not cast, and of course that'll just allow it to compile and give us an error if we need to, and then if that all works, and so if we do get a main table view cell, then we can set this text item and return the cell. So let's compile it and see how we go. And there you go. So we've got our cells Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, Echo, and Foxtrot. So there's no more cells, there's only as many cells as we've got items in our array, and every time we've gone through it, it's placed the respective cell number into, it's collected that string and it's placed it into the text. So let's look at how we can do that without a storyboard. Okay, so without a storyboard, let's get rid of the storyboard. I'll just remove the reference so the file stays in the project. And so the first thing we need to do is we need to bring our app delegate window to the front, and we do that by saying let window equals UI window. We want to frame it in the UI screen .main .bounds. Then we need to call window.makeKey invisible, and then we need to set the root view controller, and that is simply going to be main table view controller. So when we run it, that should bring us to the start, and now we've got this outlet which we aren't going to use. And before I forget, let's go to the table view, and where it's got this main interface, we need to get rid of that, or it's going to tell us something about not being able to find a storyboard. And I'll just save that. And the next thing we need to do is just create this initial view and we just need to set that as the launch screen because that gets rid of another error for us. Okay, so we go to our main table view. We've got this call sign label outlet here. Now that's not going to exist, and what we need to do is we need to remove this await from nib because we don't have a nib file, but we need to do an initialization. So we need to override the init function and give me that, and that needs to call super.init, and it needs to pass along a style of .default and this reuse identifier, and there's a required initializer, so we just need to chuck that in as well. We need to put in here style and that's fine. So we're just going to command click on this UI table cell style, jump to the definition there, and it's got this enumerator here. It says if it's default, it's a simple cell with a text label, so it already comes with a text label and an optional image view, and then there's these other case value 1, case value 2 and case subtitle which give you some defaults. So we don't need to create a text label if we use the default style because it already comes with a text label. So when we go to our main view controller, the cell is not going to be called call sign label. It's going to be called cell.label text or something like text label. There you go. May or may not be there. And we just copy and paste that. So that's looking good. Now the other thing we need to do is we need to link our table view controller to our view cells because we haven't copied the cell to this table in the storyboard. So what we need to do is we need to register the cell with the table, and we just do that by going TableView.register, and then the cell class is just main TableView cell .self. And for the reuse identifier, we're going to use our kReuse .self and kReuse identifier. And the other thing we might want to do is we might just want to say, using another override function, that the height is going to be, say, 45 pixels in height, 45.0, so it's a float. Let's see how that runs. And there you go, everything's done in self. Now I will just point out a couple of things. Firstly, if we command click on UITableViewController, now it says here, create a table view with the correct dimensions and auto resizing, setting the data source and delegate to self. So we don't actually need to have these two lines because it's done automatically for us. Let's run again to prove that. Okay, so that's all good. The other thing is that there's some sort of bug in the simulators or Xcode 9, I'm not exactly sure which, but basically you may get a situation where your screen just goes black. Once it goes black, it's never coming back. So what you need to do is you can restart your computer, or you can clean the project and see if that resolves the problem. I read somewhere about just force quitting the simulator doesn't fix some issue. You need to quit it properly. So anyway, so restarting might fix the problem. The only way I managed to do it is to create a new project. This project's now called test, and all I did was copy all the files into the project and run it, and it worked fine. So just be aware that something is a little bit flaky in Xcode 9 or these simulators, although it still failed. Once it starts, it fails when it uploads to my iPhone. So yeah, just be aware. Don't spend hours like I did trying to debug it. Just start a new project and import the files. And that's it. Well, that's it for simple table view controllers. There's a lot more that can be done with a table view, such as headers and footers and sections, but we will cover those off in another lesson. Next lesson, we'll move on to collection views. If you have any questions about the tutorial, then please leave a comment below or hit me up on Twitter @SwiftAlmanac. Please subscribe to the channel, it's free, and check out our website at www.swiftalmanac.com. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Cheers.